public airport. You just threw away a federal document and now the whole world will see it.
You don't look like someone who should be flying alone. This passport, it's going in the trash. The gate agent's words slice through the air at Terminal C, Gate 17, inside Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. She says them so casually, like tossing away a napkin instead of a government-issued passport. The sound of the passport hitting the trash can is louder than it should be. Louder than logic. Louder than justice. And just like that, Kaylin Monroe, a 14-year-old black girl with a radiant smile, flawless skin, and quiet strength, stands face to face with what millions know, but too few dare to say out loud. Racial profiling is alive, and it's wearing a uniform today. Welcome to Hidden Worth. This isn't just a story. This is a black story. One about rights denied and power reclaimed. And what happens next is going to leave you speechless. So if this moment grabs your attention, if your heartbeat just skipped because you've seen this happen before or feared it would happen to someone you love, go ahead and subscribe. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. And this story, it's one you'll carry long after the video ends. Kaylin doesn't scream, she doesn't cry, she doesn't beg. Instead, she does what she's been trained to do since she was 10 years old. She steps back, she breathes. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Her hands move slowly, purposefully, toward her backpack. Her phone is out now. The camera is live. I am Kaylin Monroe. It is 9:42 a.m. on Saturday, July 15th. I'm standing at Gate 17 inches Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. A gate agent has just thrown away my valid U.S. passport because she said, and I quote, "I don't look like someone who should be flying alone. I am recording this for legal documentation." The gate area falls into a hush. At first, it's just a few passengers who turn their heads, but it spreads fast. A white woman in her 60s clutches her chest. A Latino father turns to shield his kids, then phones. Everywhere. Up in the air. Cameras rolling. The gate agent, Carla Whitman, shifts uncomfortably. Her face twists confusion, maybe fear, definitely anger. She steps forward, pointing. "Turn that off. Now." Kaylin doesn't flinch. Under the First Amendment and Glick v. Cunniff, I have the legal right to record a public official performing duties in a public space. You are under contract with a federally funded agency. Your actions constitute racial profiling, and I will be pursuing this. She says it like she's reading from a script. But there's no script. This is lived experience. This is what happens when a young black girl is taught not just to survive, but to fight back with words, with law, with truth. And this is only the beginning. Because in the next 10 minutes, what starts as one girl's act of resistance will grow into a movement. Because in the next hour, what she says will reach across the country. And because by tomorrow, Kaylin Monroe won't just be a name on a boarding pass, she'll be a name that changes everything. Stay with us. This black story is far from over. Before the camera started rolling at Gate 17, before the passport hit the trash, before the eyes of the country turned toward a teenager in khaki pants and a navy blue hoodie, Kaylin Monroe was already preparing for this moment. She just didn't know it yet. Kaylin is 14 years old. Born and raised in Chandler, Arizona, a sun-drenched suburb just outside Phoenix. She lives in a 2-story home with blue shutters and a backyard filled with lemon trees and hand-painted protest signs. In her neighborhood, folks wave as they pass each other, but they also whisper when they think no one's listening. Her father, Jeremiah Monroe, is a political journalist. His work has appeared in everything from the Washington Post to grassroots newsletters most people have never heard of. He spent his career holding people in power accountable. Her mother, Dana Monroe, teaches public policy at Arizona State University. She doesn't just believe in social justice, she breaks it down on a whiteboard, assigns homework, and quizzes students on how to apply it in real life. Kaylin was born into a household where conversations at the dinner table often sounded like a debate prep session. When other kids her age were playing video games, she was sitting cross-legged on the living room carpet, watching documentaries about the civil rights movement. When she turned 10, her parents gave her a laminated card with the Bill of Rights on one side and a list of her rights as a minor on the other. That card has traveled with her ever since, tucked in the inside pocket of every backpack she owns. She's not what you'd call loud, not the kid who always raises her hand or wants the spotlight. But when Kaylin speaks, people listen. Because her words aren't just well chosen, they're backed by clarity and calm. Her teachers describe her as laser-focused. Her classmates say she's the smartest person in the room, but never makes you feel like you're not. Last year, she competed in the statewide Youth Policy Forum, a space where middle and high schoolers debate real legislation. Her topic? Racial disparities in air travel security protocols. She stood in front of a panel of former judges, lawmakers, and professors, and calmly walked them through case law, statistics, and actionable reforms. She won second place that year not because her argument wasn't airtight, but because, in her words, sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, and people aren't ready to vote for discomfort. She didn't complain. She wrote a blog post instead titled, "Winning is not the only way to win," and it got picked up by a youth civil rights website with tens of thousands of readers. One of those readers? A high school debater from New Jersey who sent her a message that simply said, "You made me believe I could speak up." Kaylin keeps that message saved on her phone. She's also a huge fan of sneakers, old school R&B, and boba tea. She plays piano by ear and can usually be found in the back corner of her school library, headphones in, sketching out speech drafts in a worn leather notebook. Her hoodie, the one that says, "Know Your Rights," in bold white letters, isn't just fashion. It's her reminder, her shield, her quiet protest. Her parents never taught her to fear confrontation. They taught her how to enter it prepared. So, when she packed her bag that morning for her solo flight to Atlanta, a trip to visit her grandmother and attend a youth civic leadership workshop, she didn't just pack clothes. She packed her folder of printed federal aviation regulations, a portable phone charger, and 3 copies of her student ID. She packed an emergency contact card with names and numbers of family legal contacts and the youth advocate at the National Youth Justice Alliance. Not because she expected a problem, but because, in America, being a young black girl means preparing for one anyway. That's Kaylin Monroe, 14, focused, fierce in the way quiet water can carve stone. And today, she's about to carve her name into the story of what justice looks like, not someday, not when she grows up, but right now. Because justice doesn't wait, and neither does she. Stay with us, this black story is just getting started. The sun rose early that Saturday morning in Chandler, Arizona, casting a soft golden light over the Monroe household. The desert air was already warming, the sky a clear, pale blue, and the sound of birds filtered in through the half-open kitchen window. Inside, the scent of scrambled eggs, turkey bacon, and cinnamon toast filled the air. It was a tradition. No matter what was happening in the world, a breaking news cycle, a packed class schedule, a looming competition, Saturday morning was family breakfast. That morning, it felt like any other, until it wasn't. Kaylin sat at the kitchen island, hoodie zipped up, hair pulled into 2 neat twists, backpack by her feet. She looked relaxed, but her fingers tapped lightly against the edge of her glass. She was ready, almost too ready. Across from her, Jeremiah was flipping through an article draft on his tablet, while Dana sprinkled paprika on the eggs. Neither parent said much at first, not because there was tension, but because this moment didn't need extra words. Their daughter was about to board her first solo flight across the country, and while she had prepared for it more than most adults would, they were still parents, and this was still America. "You got everything?" Dana asked as she slid a plate toward Kaylin. Kaylin nodded, already running through her checklist. ID, boarding pass, phone, backup battery, printed documents, legal card, check, check, and double check. Jeremiah glanced up. "Your folder?" She reached into her bag and pulled out the navy blue folder. It was a little worn at the corners but neatly organized. Inside were copies of federal passenger rights, recent articles about airline discrimination, and a handwritten page of reminders in her looping cursive: stay calm, speak clearly, ask for names, record everything, don't back down. Her father gave her a proud nod. Dana sat beside Kaylin, brushing a crumb off her daughter's cheek. "Don't forget to eat," she said gently. "You'll need energy." Kaylin smiled and took a bite, but her mind was already at the airport. She'd been to Phoenix Sky Harbor before, of course, but never alone. This trip was different. Not just because of the solo flight, but because of what she was flying toward. In Atlanta, her grandmother, Miss Leona, was waiting a woman as bold as her name. A retired teacher and longtime community activist, Miss Leona had marched in protests, organized voter registration drives, and taught dozens of kids how to speak truth to power. Kaylin was going to visit, yes, but also to attend a youth leadership summit where she had been invited to speak about equity in public institutions. Jeremiah checked his watch. "We should head out by 8:15. That gives us time to get through TSA without rushing." Dana added, "Remember to stay near the boarding area, and don't be afraid to ask questions if something feels off." Kaylin finished her breakfast and stood, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. "I'll be fine," she said, not dismissively, but with quiet confidence. At the door, Jeremiah handed her the laminated card, the one they always joked about being her superpower. On one side, the Bill of Rights. On the other, a list of civil liberties and emergency legal contacts. She tucked it into the outer pocket of her hoodie like a badge. Then he looked at her, eyes steady. "People might question you, not because you've done anything wrong, but because of what you look like. You remember what to do?" Kaylin didn't hesitate. "Stay calm, document, cite the law, call for help if needed. And never let anyone convince me that standing up for myself is the same as being difficult." He smiled and kissed the top of her head. "That's my girl." Outside, the morning sun was brighter now, and the drive to the airport was quiet, filled with soft music and shared glances in the rearview mirror. At drop-off, Kaylin hugged her mom tightly, then turned to her dad. "You got this," Jeremiah whispered. Kaylin nodded, adjusted her hoodie, and walked through the sliding glass doors. It was all so normal. Just a girl headed to see her grandma. Just a Saturday morning flight. Just another traveler in a sea of passengers. But in a few hours, one of those passengers would change everything. And no one, not Kaylin, not the gate agent, not the airline, would be the same after. Kaylin arrived at gate 17 with time to spare. Her flight to Atlanta was scheduled to depart in just under 90 minutes, and the boarding area was already filling with travelers. Families with roller bags, solo business flyers tapping at laptops, couples sharing coffee and earbuds. To anyone passing by, it looked like a perfectly normal Saturday at Phoenix Sky Harbor. But Kaylin had learned a long time ago that normal is not always neutral. She found a seat near the tall window, where sunlight poured in across the carpet, warming her hoodie and the top of her backpack. She opened her tablet to review her speech notes but found herself distracted. Not by the noise, not by nerves, but by something else, something quieter. At first, it was just a feeling. A shift in the way energy moved around the gate. The woman behind the desk, wearing a crisp uniform and a name tag that read, Carla Whitman, seemed efficient, maybe even pleasant, at first glance. But Kaylin was watching more closely than most. Her father had always told her, "If you want to understand someone, don't listen to what they say. Watch how they treat people who can't offer them anything." It was a rule Kaylin carried with her, and today, it whispered a warning. The first thing she noticed was the smiles. When a white woman in her 50s approached the counter to ask about boarding time, Carla looked up with a grin and said, "Oh, you're all good, Honorable. Group B starts in about 30 minutes." Her voice was upbeat, her tone friendly. Next, a young white man with a tech backpack asked about standby upgrades. Again, Carla was responsive, even chatty. "You've got a good shot. If not this flight, the next one is wide open." Then came a black woman with 2 small children. Carla's smile vanished. Her tone changed. Tight, cold. "Ma'am, do you have proper documentation for these minors?" The woman blinked. "They're my kids." Carla didn't flinch. "That's not what I asked. I need to see ID for them, and proof of guardianship if you're traveling solo." Kaylin felt her stomach turn. She glanced down at her own folder, suddenly aware of how prepared she was and why she had to be. The woman at the counter, clearly flustered, fumbled for her papers. Her toddler began to cry as the baby shifted restlessly in her arms. Carla looked annoyed. When the woman finally handed over the necessary forms, Carla studied them longer than needed, flipping through slowly. The woman kept her eyes low, like she was afraid to speak. Eventually, Carla waved her off. "Fine, You can wait for boarding." Kaylin watched her walk away, holding her babies, cheeks flushed with shame. Next came an elderly Latino couple. The man spoke limited English and was trying to ask if the gate had changed. Carla raised an eyebrow. "Do you have someone who speaks English with you?" The man repeated the word, Atlanta, and pointed to the flight number on his boarding pass. Carla sighed, overemphasized her words. "This flight is here. You are okay." Her voice was loud, slow, like she was scolding a child. The man gave a small nod and stepped away. Kaylin felt heat rise in her chest. She looked around. Most people were too distracted to notice or chose not to. Earbuds in, eyes down. It was easier that way. But not for Kaylin. This wasn't new to her. She had read about it, studied it, seen clips on social media. She even included a section on it in her debate argument. Microaggressions in airline service, the way gate agents, TSA staff, and flight crews often treated passengers of color differently, sometimes subtly, sometimes not. She scribbled a note on her tablet, patterns observed, smile differential, question inconsistency, tone shift. And then, she added a phrase her mom often said, "If your gut whispers, your brain needs to listen." Because something was off at gate 17. Kaylin didn't know yet that she would soon become the next person Carla Whitman targeted. She didn't know her passport would be questioned, that her very identity would be treated like an inconvenience, that she would become the center of a moment that would ripple across the country. But she knew enough to pay attention, and that made all the difference. When Group A was called to the boarding line, Kaylin rose from her seat with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going and why. She tucked her tablet into her backpack, zipped it, and made her way to the gate. The line moved quickly. One by one, passengers scanned their phones, flashed quick smiles, and were waved through without issue. A few friendly nods from Carla, a half-hearted, "Have a nice flight," and they were gone. Then came Kaylin. She stepped forward, phone in hand, mobile boarding pass ready, passport held out respectfully. Carla glanced up. Her eyes landed on Kaylin, brown skin, natural curls pulled back, a worn hoodie that read "Know Your Rights" in block letters across the chest. Everything about her changed. The warmth vanished, the tone dropped. "ID," Carla said flatly, as if Kaylin hadn't already offered it. Kaylin remained polite. "Here's my passport and my boarding pass. I'm on flight 287 to Atlanta." Carla took the passport but didn't scan the boarding pass. Instead, she turned the document over, examining it with exaggerated caution, flipping through the pages, holding it up to the light, comparing the photo with Kaylin's face as though searching for something wrong. Kaylin stayed still, watching her. "How old are you?" Carla asked without looking up. 14, Kaylin answered, her voice steady. "And you're flying alone?" "Yes, ma'am." A long pause. "And who bought this ticket for you?" Kaylin blinked. "My parents." Carla finally looked up. "Where are they?" Kaylin gestured calmly behind her. "They dropped me off at the security checkpoint about 45 minutes ago." Another beat of silence. "And how exactly did you pay for this ticket?" The words hit like a slap. Kaylin didn't respond immediately. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because she was trying to make sure she heard the question correctly. "Excuse me?" she asked, polite but firm. "You heard me," Carla said, lips tight. "Most kids your age don't fly cross-country alone, especially not on a weekend." Kaylin tilted her head slightly. "Is that a policy concern or a personal opinion?" Carla narrowed her eyes. Kaylin continued, voice calm. "Because I noticed you didn't ask the last 3 solo passengers those questions. And I was watching." A slight ripple of sound from the boarding area, someone shifting, someone muttering. Carla's lips twitched. "Watch your tone, young lady." "My tone is respectful," Kaylin said. "I'm asking why I'm receiving different treatment than others. That's a reasonable question." Carla held up the passport again. "Well, something doesn't feel right about this." Kaylin pointed at the document. "My name matches my boarding pass. The date of birth matches my ID. The photo is current. What exactly feels off?" Carla didn't answer. Kaylin felt her heartbeat pick up. but her face remained composed. She remembered her dad's voice. Never match their energy. Stay rooted. Let the facts be louder than your fear. She took a slow breath. If there's a legitimate issue, Kaylin said, I'm happy to address it. But if this is based on an assumption, then I'd like to understand what that assumption is. Carla's voice dropped to a whisper-sharp hiss. You're being awfully defensive for someone your age. Kaylin didn't miss a beat. And you're being unusually aggressive for someone doing a routine ID check. A few people in the boarding line were watching now. One woman pulled her phone from her purse, not raising it to record yet but ready. Carla waved the passport slightly. You're not boarding until I finish checking this. Kaylin looked at her, really looked, and then asked the question that turned the energy in the room. Is it the passport, or is it the color of my skin? The question didn't rise in volume. It didn't come with an edge, but it hit harder than any shout ever could. The air went still. Carla's jaw clenched. Excuse me? Kaylin stood her ground. You didn't ask these questions to the white teenage boy who boarded 5 minutes ago, or the white woman traveling solo with no ID beyond a driver's license. I watched. I'm asking why my documentation is suspicious when theirs was not. Carla crossed her arms. You don't get to accuse people of racism just because you don't like being asked questions. I'm not accusing, Kaylin said. I'm observing, and I'm recording mental notes, because if there's a pattern, and I believe there is, then this is not just about me. It's about how people like me are treated in public spaces. She said it clearly, for everyone to hear. The gate went silent again. And in that stillness, something shifted. Carla stared back at Kaylin like she couldn't quite decide if she was annoyed, angry, or afraid. Kaylin stood quietly, eyes forward, hands relaxed by her side. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step back. She simply waited. And that waiting, that refusal to shrink, was louder than anything she could have said. Carla Whitman was silent for a moment, but her body language spoke volumes. She shifted her weight, adjusted the edge of her blazer, then looked Kaylin up and down again. The line behind the teen had grown longer, but no one seemed in a rush. Conversations had quieted. People were listening now, not openly, but intently, pretending to scroll on their phones while tuning into every word. Kaylin stood still, shoulders square, hands relaxed, eyes level. Wait right here, Carla said abruptly, walking behind the counter with Kaylin's passport still in her hand. Kaylin didn't move. Behind her, a woman whispered to her teenage son, "This doesn't feel right." A man 2 rows down pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. The red dot didn't start blinking yet, but it hovered, ready. Carla reappeared with a forced calm. "I'm going to need to confiscate this passport," she said, holding it up like evidence. Kaylin raised her eyebrows, her voice still soft but unwavering. "You do not have the legal authority to confiscate a federal document. Only customs officers or authorized federal agents can do that. Are you either of those?" Carla blinked. The question hit hard because it was true. Kaylin had read that exact regulation in the FAA passenger handbook. Her father made her memorize it. Federal Law, Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 1543 makes it a crime to knowingly destroy or unlawfully seize someone's official government-issued ID. That includes passports. Carla clearly didn't know that, or maybe she did, and didn't care. "Young lady, you're becoming combative," Carla snapped. "I've been doing this job for 22 years. And in 22 years, Kaylin replied. "Have you ever been challenged by someone who knew the law?" The woman in line finally hit record. Carla's cheeks flushed, her hand tightened around the passport. And then it happened. Without warning, without explanation, Carla turned around, walked to the trash bin just behind the gate counter, and with deliberate motion, held the passport over the opening. Kaylin saw it coming a half second before it happened. She took a step forward and raised her voice calm but urgent. "Ma'am, I am informing you that destruction of a federal document is a felony under federal law. You are about to commit a criminal offense in a public, federally funded space." Carla didn't stop. She looked directly at Kaylin, almost daring her, and dropped the passport. The sound was soft, a gentle plunk into the plastic liner. But in Kaylin's ears, it echoed. Gasps erupted from the gate, One man actually said it out loud. Did she really just do that? Carla turned back, crossed her arms and said coldly, "Looks like you're not flying anywhere today." Kaylin stood frozen for a breath, not because she didn't know what to do, but because she knew exactly what came next. She had prepared for this, yes, but still, watching it unfold, the blatant disregard, the absolute abuse of power, it stung. Not because of the inconvenience, but because it was so intentional, so public, so unnecessary. A child had just been humiliated for being prepared, for knowing her rights, for being black. Kaylin reached into her bag slowly and pulled out her phone. No shaking, no panic, just purpose. She opened the camera app and hit record. "My name is Kaylin Monroe," she said clearly. "It is 10:13 a.m. I am standing at gate 17 inches Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. A gate agent named Carla Whitman has just thrown away my valid U.S. passport after subjecting me to discriminatory questioning and accusing me, without evidence, of fraudulent identification. I am recording this for legal purposes and personal safety." Several phones lifted in the background. Recordings started. Some were discreet, others obvious. Carla's expression cracked, just slightly. "This is not your personal courtroom," she said harshly. Kaylin replied, "No, but it is a federally funded public space, and your actions fall under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination based on race in any program receiving federal assistance. This airport qualifies under that definition." Someone behind Kaylin muttered, "She's right." Another voice, "I saw the whole thing. This is wrong." Carla's face was now a strange mix of panic and pride, too deep into the moment to admit fault, too exposed to maintain control. "You'll need to speak to security," she snapped, picking up the gate phone. Kaylin didn't blink. "Please do." She turned slightly to the gathering crowd. "For anyone recording, I ask only that you capture events as they are. No edits, no assumptions, just the truth." A woman near the window stood up. "I've got the full video." And just like that, the balance of power shifted. The gate agent had drawn a line. And Kaylin? She stepped across it, armed with truth, backed by the Constitution, and witnessed by a room full of strangers who were no longer silent. This was no longer just about a passport. It was about what happens when silence is broken, and justice gets a voice. By the time airport security arrived at gate 17, the story had already left the building. It was on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram Reels, and Facebook Live. In less than 15 minutes, clips from multiple angles had been uploaded, stitched together, and shared by strangers who had no idea their morning flights would become part of a national conversation. The first video came from a woman named Rachel, a mom of two from Denver who happened to be flying home after a work trip. Her post was simple. This gate agent just threw a black teen's passport in the trash. She knew her rights, and this is what happened next. Attached was a 47-second clip of Kaylin stating her name, the date, the time, and calmly explaining that her legal document had just been destroyed. It showed Carla's face rigid and unapologetic. It showed Kaylin's composure, and it showed something else too. The silent agreement of a crowd who had started paying attention. Within the hour, the video had 80,000 views. Within 2 hours, it crossed 250,000, and that was just Rachel's version. Dozens of other passengers posted their own angles. Some focused on Carla dropping the passport. Others captured Kaylin's statement of rights. One even zoomed in on the trash bin, a dark blue passport peeking out between a crumpled Starbucks cup and a candy wrapper. People didn't just watch, they commented, they shared, they reacted. The first hashtag to emerge was simple, number justice for Kaylin. Then came number know your rights, number flying while black, and number gate 17 incident. Twitter timelines lit up with outrage and awe. 14 years old and quoting federal law while being discriminated against, she's a hero. If Kaylin were white, that passport would still be in her hand. This should be required viewing in every school and airline training session. Civil rights activists picked it up next. The NAACP retweeted the original video with a single caption, "We're watching." An attorney in Chicago posted a legal thread breaking down everything Kaylin said, point by point, confirming the accuracy of her citations. This young woman didn't just act bravely, she acted legally. And she's absolutely right. What that gate agent did was unlawful. By lunchtime in Arizona, the hashtag was trending nationwide. Major news outlets began calling witnesses, MSNBC, NPR, local channels in Phoenix and Atlanta. A video editor from one station commented that it was the most organized and articulate civil rights confrontation she'd ever seen, and it came from a girl who wasn't even old enough to vote. Back at the airport, Kaylin wasn't checking her phone. She didn't know the world was watching yet. She was still standing near the gate, surrounded by security, passengers, and one very pale-faced Carla Whitman, who had finally started to realize that her morning wasn't going to end the way she planned. Kaylin's hands didn't shake. She didn't gloat. She didn't even raise her voice. But what she had done, what everyone had seen, had shaken something far bigger than a gate agent's confidence. She had cracked open a conversation that many in the country were all too familiar with, and many others were too uncomfortable to confront, about who gets questioned, who gets believed, and what happens when a child armed only with truth and calm refuses to be erased. The comments kept flooding in. Teachers posted that they were using the video in Monday's lesson plans. Parents wrote that they showed it to their kids as an example of courage. Black teens across the country tagged their friends, saying, "This could have been me." And under every post, the same message repeated again and again. "Kaylin, we see you. We stand with you." Because this wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to every person who had ever been dismissed, doubted, or denied. And this time, the whole world was watching. As the energy around Gate 17 shifted from quiet shock to growing momentum, a new figure stepped forward. His name was Christopher Park, Chris to his co-workers, a junior gate agent barely 6 months into the job. At 26 years old, he was fresh-faced, polite, and known among staff as the one who always stayed late to clean up the desk before shift change. He hadn't been on duty when the confrontation began. He was just passing through on his way to another gate when he saw a cluster of people gathered, eyes on phones, mouths tense, some recording, some whispering. He paused. Something didn't feel right. Then he saw her. Kaylin Monroe, calm, composed, standing near the counter with no passport in her hand and a quiet storm in her eyes. Then he saw Carla. She was pacing behind the counter, flushed with something between anger and panic. Her arms crossed, her voice tight, her jaw clenched. It was not the first time Chris had seen that look on her face. He had seen Carla change when she spoke to certain passengers, seen the way she shortened her tone, increased her scrutiny, asked questions she never seemed to ask others. He hadn't said anything before. But this time was different. This time there was a crowd, a camera, a girl, and something in Chris couldn't walk past it. He approached slowly, holding his ID badge forward, speaking with steady courtesy. "Ma'am," he said to Carla, "is there a problem I can assist with?" Carla's head snapped toward him. "No. This passenger was being disruptive and refused to follow instructions. I've already called security." Chris turned to Kaylin, who met his eyes directly. She didn't look angry. She looked ready, like she was bracing for whatever came next. He looked down at her, not down on her, and asked gently, "Miss, may I ask what happened?" Kaylin didn't hesitate. "This gate agent threw away my passport. I have video, so do multiple witnesses. I was questioned inappropriately, and when I asked for clarification, I was accused of being combative." Chris blinked. He looked over at the trash bin, then at Carla. "Is that true?" he asked. Carla's nostrils flared. She was confrontational. The passport seemed suspicious. "I followed my instinct." Chris knew better than to argue in front of passengers, but his stomach sank. He took a step toward the trash can and carefully lifted the liner, scanning near the top. Less than 30 seconds later, he pulled out the navy blue cover of a U.S. passport, slightly bent but clearly intact. He opened it. Kaylin Monroe. The photo matched perfectly. Everything looked legitimate. Chris took a deep breath. He turned to Carla, his voice low but firm. "This passport is valid." Carla said nothing. Chris turned back to Kaylin and held it out to her respectfully. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You should never have been treated this way." Kaylin accepted it with a nod of gratitude. Her fingers curled around the cover, but her voice didn't rise. "I appreciate your help," she said. The crowd began murmuring again, louder this time. Words like unbelievable, disgraceful, and she needs to be fired floated in the air. Chris felt them too, but what hit him harder was the realization that he had known something was wrong with Carla's behavior for months and done nothing. He stepped closer and lowered his voice so only Kaylin could hear. "I've seen her do this before. Not like this, but enough. I've written things down, notes, times, dates, but I didn't know where to take them." Kaylin looked up at him. "Now you do." And in that moment, he realized she was right. This wasn't just about helping her. It was about choosing who he wanted to be in this system. Not a bystander, not a coward, an ally. "I'll write a report," Chris said, louder now. "I'll document what I witnessed today and what I've seen in the past." Carla's face went rigid. Kaylin smiled, just slightly. "Thank you," she said. "It matters." Chris nodded, because he knew it did. And for the first time in his short career, he felt like he was doing more than scanning boarding passes. He was doing the right thing. 20 minutes after the moment Carla Whitman dropped Kaylin's passport into the trash, a black SUV pulled up fast and hard outside Terminal 3. Jeremiah Monroe stepped out before the engine fully stopped. He didn't bother with sunglasses, didn't smooth down his shirt, didn't glance at the mirror. He just moved quickly, purposefully through the sliding doors of Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. He knew where Gate 17 was, knew the layout like a map folded in his back pocket, knew his daughter was standing there, without her passport, at the center of a crowd, holding her phone like a shield. And he knew one more thing. He wasn't showing up as a father instead of a journalist. He was showing up as both. Because for Jeremiah Monroe, there was never a line between storytelling and justice. Not when stories shaped what people believed. Not when belief dictated power. As he passed TSA and made his way down the terminal, notifications buzzed across his phone like a drum roll. 3 missed calls from his editor. 12 DMs from fellow reporters. 2 texts from national producers asking for statements. But none of that mattered until he saw her. Kaylin, still standing strong, still calm, still surrounded by strangers who had become witnesses, and one young gate agent standing protectively by her side. She looked over and saw him not with relief, but with recognition. "There you are. Let's finish this." Jeremiah didn't stop walking. He stepped into the space between his daughter and the desk and addressed the group like it was a press briefing. "My name is Jeremiah Monroe. I'm a journalist. I'm also this young woman's father, and I'm here to get answers." Carla flinched at the name. She knew it. Everyone in media did. Monroe had spent 2 decades writing hard truths about government failings, racial injustice, and institutional bias. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, but when his byline appeared, people paid attention. Kaylin handed him the passport still bent from being in the trash, and then gestured toward the witnesses, the recordings, the evidence. Jeremiah turned toward Carla. "You destroyed a federal document, in public, in front of witnesses, on video. Why?" Carla looked pale. It seemed suspicious. "To you," Jeremiah said, "or to the policies you're supposed to follow?" No answer. He didn't wait. Under Title 18, U.S. Code Section 1543, that's destruction of a federal document. Under Title 6 of the Civil Rights Act, your behavior qualifies as racial discrimination in a federally funded space, and under FAA consumer protection regulations, this is an abuse of authority. He paused. You don't get to strip someone of their dignity and hide behind your instincts. Carla opened her mouth, but Jeremiah kept going, not shouting, not posturing, just delivering facts the way he would write a lead paragraph. "Let me be clear. My daughter came prepared. She followed the law. She stayed calm. She gave you no reason to escalate, no reason to assume wrongdoing, no justification for the act you chose to commit." Then, he turned to the gathering of passengers. "My daughter stood here alone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg. She cited law and recorded facts. And you saw what happened when she did." Chris Park, standing nearby, stepped up. She's telling the truth. I witnessed the entire incident. I've seen patterns before. I'll submit a report. I'm willing to speak to legal." Jeremiah gave him a respectful nod. "Thank you." Then he looked back at Kaylin. She hadn't cried. She hadn't broken down. She stood there like she always did, composed, grounded, and ready. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. Kaylin smiled. "I stayed calm." "I know," he replied, "and because you did, everything's going to change." And he meant it. Because he wasn't just going to write about what happened. He was going to make sure the world read it and responded. Silence settled like a heavy fog across Gate 17. The kind of silence that follows something loud, not in volume, but in truth. Jeremiah Monroe stood at the edge of the counter, passport in hand, gaze locked on the woman who, just an hour earlier, had believed herself untouchable. Carla Whitman. Her name badge, once gleaming under the terminal lights, now looked dull against the weight of the moment. Kaylin stood beside her father, calm as ever, her phone still recording. Carla straightened. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back. You're interfering with airline operations." Jeremiah didn't move. "I'm advocating for a minor whose rights were violated. If that's interference to you, I suggest you revisit your employee manual." A ripple of quiet agreement passed through the onlookers. "I've already contacted my supervisor," Carla said, grasping for control. "She's on her way. Until then, I am the senior authority at this gate." Kaylin's eyes narrowed slightly. "And who gave you the authority to violate federal law?" Carla flinched, but kept her voice steady. "I did what I believed was necessary based on the situation." Jeremiah held up the crumpled passport. "You mean this situation? Where a 4-year-old girl, traveling legally with a valid ticket and documentation, was interrogated, humiliated, and had her identity tossed in the trash like it didn't matter?" "I followed protocol," Carla insisted. "Show us the protocol," Jeremiah replied. Carla hesitated. "Because I've read the Department of Transportation's official guidelines," he continued. "I've read the Civil Rights Act. I've read the FAA policies regarding unaccompanied minors, and nowhere does it say a gate agent can destroy a federal document based on a feeling." Her silence spoke louder than her words ever could. That was when she appeared. A woman in a navy blazer with gold lapel pins, and the unmistakable presence of someone who walked into rooms knowing people would listen. Her ID badge read, S. Halvorsen, Operations Manager. She stepped through the crowd, parting bodies like a tide, and approached the counter. "I'm Sarah Halvorsen," she said clearly. "Who here is Jeremiah Monroe?" Jeremiah turned. "That would be me." "And you're Kaylin's father?" "Yes. I've been briefed by airport security and my corporate contact. I've also reviewed the passenger's documentation, which has been confirmed valid by our secondary screening team." Then she turned to Carla. "In your own words, explain why this passenger's passport ended up in a trash can." Carla stiffened. The ID looked suspicious. I had doubts. "Did you verify those doubts with another agent? Did you escalate it to your shift supervisor before discarding a legal document?" Carla's lips parted, but nothing came out. Halvorsen didn't blink. "Because that's the procedure. Doubt does not grant authority. Feeling uncomfortable is not grounds for escalation without proper review." The crowd watched as Carla began to shrink into herself, the certainty drained from her stance. "Furthermore," Halvorsen continued, "this passenger, a minor, appears to have been questioned far more aggressively than other travelers today. I have 3 video angles, multiple witness statements, and 2 uniformed employees corroborating this pattern." Jeremiah looked at Halvorsen. "So, what happens now?" Halvorsen's response was swift. "Carla Whitman is being placed on administrative suspension, effective immediately, pending a formal investigation. She will relinquish her badge, keys, and access card before leaving the premises." Carla gasped. "You can't do that." "I can," Halvorsen interrupted, "and I just did." Security stepped closer. Not aggressively, not forcefully, but present, clear, and unspoken. Carla fumbled with her lanyard, removing her badge and laying it on the counter. Jeremiah folded his arms. Power is only legitimate when it's accountable. When it isn't, it's just a costume. Kaylin didn't say a word. She just watched as the same woman who tried to make her feel small now handed over the symbols of control that had justified her behavior. Halvorson turned to Kaylin. "I want to personally apologize for what happened today," she said. "And I want you to know, this isn't over. The airline is taking this seriously." Kaylin finally spoke. "Thank you, but I don't want a personal apology. I want policy change." Halvorson met her eyes. "You'll get both." And in that moment, the roles were clear. Carla was no longer the one in charge. Kaylin wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a voice. And the whole system was finally listening. As Carla Whitman was quietly escorted from Gate 17, her badge surrendered and her authority stripped away, the crowd didn't move. No one rushed to board, no one scattered to their flights. Because something bigger was unfolding, not just justice for Kaylin, but something deeper, something older. And then a voice spoke from the back. "I know her," the woman said. She looked to be in her 40s, black, dressed in a sharp business suit, a rolling carry-on at her side. "She stopped me last year, same airport, same gate." All eyes turned. "She said my ID didn't look like me, claimed I looked nervous, and that was suspicious. I missed my flight. Had to pay for a new one. Nobody believed me when I said it felt like racism." Chris Park stepped forward, eyebrows raised. "Was her name Carla?" The woman nodded. "Yep, I didn't forget her face." Halvorson turned, taking mental note. "Would you be willing to give a written statement?" "I already pulled up my old complaint," the woman said, holding up her phone. "Filed it with customer service. Got a boilerplate reply. Nothing ever came of it." From the far side of the terminal, an older Asian American couple approached slowly. The husband leaned on a cane. His wife held a printed boarding pass. They spoke softly, English with thick accents, but their words were clear. "She yelled at us," the man said. "Last month. Told us we were standing in the wrong zone. We tried to explain, but she talked loud, wave hands, embarrass us." The wife added, "Make us feel small, like children." Kaylin stood silently, watching, listening. One by one, others began to step forward. A Latina mother, holding the hand of her 7-year-old daughter. She questioned if I was really my kid's mom, said we didn't look related. A college student, light brown skin, curly hair, backpack across his chest. She asked me where I got the money for my ticket, like she did to you. A man in a business suit with a briefcase. She made me take off my head covering for security reasons. Said she had the right to request it. I didn't know any better. I let her. Statement after statement, story after story. A pattern was forming. Not an isolated incident, not a misunderstanding, but a long-standing practice of targeting passengers of color, with subtle digs, extra scrutiny, and overt disrespect. Halvorson's face hardened as she listened. "We will reopen all closed complaints related to this employee," she said. "Every single one, and we will contact the passengers who filed them." Jeremiah Monroe stepped in. "That's not enough. You need to audit the entire process, how complaints are handled, who reviews them, and whether any of those reviewers are protecting people like her." Chris Park shifted uncomfortably. "She's been here for a while, a decade, maybe more. Everyone knew she was strict. But now that I'm hearing this, it wasn't just strict, it was targeted." Kaylin looked up at him. "You knew something felt off." Chris nodded. "I didn't speak up. I told myself it wasn't my place." Kaylin's voice was quiet but clear. "It always is. Silence lets it continue." There was no judgment in her tone, just truth. And Chris knew it. Halvorson turned to her team and spoke into her earpiece. "Get legal, get HR, get comms. This just became a multi-department issue." Someone nearby began clapping, slowly at first, then louder. Others joined in, not as celebration, but as acknowledgement. They weren't just witnessing one girl's stand anymore. They were witnessing a system being unmasked. Kaylin looked around at the people gathered, strangers just an hour ago, now connected by one moment, one truth. She had been the spark. But clearly, she wasn't the only fire. "I wasn't the first," Kaylin said quietly, almost to herself. But everyone heard her. And no one doubted that she'd make sure she was the last. As the last witness stepped forward and the final story was shared, the energy at Gate 17 shifted again, not from silence to sound, but from hurt to resolve. Kaylin stood just slightly in front of her father, her shoulders back, her voice measured. The passport, still creased from the trash can, was tucked safely inside her hoodie pocket now, but her focus had moved far beyond her own boarding pass. Sarah Halvorsen, the operations manager, turned toward Kaylin and said what so many companies say in moments like this. "On behalf of the airline, I want to extend our sincere apology. What happened today was unacceptable. We will, of course, refund your ticket. And we'd like to offer your family a travel voucher as a gesture of goodwill." Kaylin didn't hesitate. "Thank you, but no." Halvorsen paused. "Excuse me? I don't want a voucher," Kaylin said. "I want reform." The words landed like stone on glass. Around her, people grew still. Her father raised his eyebrows slightly, a smile beginning at the corner of his mouth. He knew that tone, that shift in her voice. It was the same tone she used when walking into her first debate and refusing to back down. Halvorsen recovered quickly. "Of course, we're conducting an internal review." Kaylin lifted her hand politely, not to interrupt but to redirect. "I'm not talking about internal reviews that end in vague press statements. I'm talking about real, structural change. Change that's visible, measurable, accountable." Halvorsen blinked. "Go on." Kaylin reached into her backpack and pulled out a slim folder. It was navy blue, laminated, labeled in black marker, "Passenger Equity, Draft Reform Packet." She handed it to Halvorsen. "I wrote this for a school project last fall," she said. "The assignment was to create policy recommendations that could reduce inequality in public-facing institutions. I picked airports." Jeremiah chuckled quietly behind her. Halvorsen opened the folder and scanned the first page. It was clearly organized bullet points, references, even citations to federal regulations and previous complaints filed with the Department of Transportation. Kaylin explained. "First, mandatory anti-bias training, not a once-a-year online video that people click through. I'm talking about simulation-based training with real scenarios. Role-playing, reflection, and peer accountability. At least 4 hours per quarter, every year." Halvorsen nodded slowly. "Second," Kaylin continued, "a publicly posted passenger bill of rights at every gate. Simple language, big enough to read. It should outline the rights of travelers, especially minors, non-English speakers, and people with disabilities. Not buried in a terms of service page online. Third," she said, turning another page, "an independent complaint review board. Not just customer service staff employed by the airline. An actual third-party oversight committee with rotating reviewers, passenger advocates, and legal advisors. Every complaint needs a unique case ID. Every response must be time-stamped." She looked up. "You want passengers to trust you again? Show them you're not protecting bad behavior behind closed doors." Halvorsen was now fully engaged, reading more carefully. The crowd watched in awe. Kaylin, barely 5 feet tall in sneakers and a hoodie, was standing there outlining structural reform to a corporate manager in the middle of a public terminal, and doing it better than most adults ever could. "Fourth," Kaylin said, "quarterly audits on racial and behavioral disparities in staff-patient interactions. You can't fix what you don't measure." "And fifth," she said, closing the folder, "a clear, protected channel for employees to report discriminatory behavior by coworkers without fear of retaliation. Because Chris shouldn't have had to wait until today to speak up." Chris Park, standing nearby, looked down not with shame, but with recognition. Halvorsen took a deep breath. "You're suggesting that we not only address what happened today, but that we create systems to prevent it from happening again?" Kaylin nodded. "Exactly." Halvorsen looked around at the passengers still gathered, the phone still recording, the eyes still watching. "You're right," she said quietly. "I've never seen a policy proposal this clear come from someone your age or from someone this prepared." Kaylin smiled. "Age doesn't determine preparation, urgency does." A man in the crowd whispered, "Damn, that's leadership." Jeremiah stepped forward, placing a hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. "She doesn't want PR, She wants prevention. Halverson closed the folder and held it firmly. "We'll take this to the executive team," she promised. "This is not going to disappear in a drawer." Kaylin replied, "I'll be following up." And she meant it. Because she hadn't come to that airport just to catch a flight. She had come, without knowing it, to change how people are treated in one of the most everyday spaces in American life. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with solutions, and the quiet power of someone who refuses to settle for apology when what the world really needs is accountability. By the time Kaylin Monroe's story reached its 4th hour online, the ripples had already become waves. It started small, a single post on TikTok from a passenger who'd witnessed the entire confrontation. Then came the stitches and duets, the side-by-side reactions, the scrolling captions in bold text. She knew her rights. She stood her ground. She made them listen. Within hours, Number Justice for Kaylin had surpassed 1 million uses on X and Instagram combined. Activists reposted the clips. Civil rights organizations began tagging federal officials. Parents began sharing the story in group chats with one message: "Show your kids this. Teach them they have a voice." But it didn't stop with views. It turned into action. A high school teacher in Charlotte rewrote her Monday lesson plan to include Kaylin's policy proposal. A university law professor in Chicago added her speech to his curriculum on civil liberties and public accountability. A youth leadership nonprofit in Atlanta announced a new digital campaign, Know Your Rights, the Kaylin Files. It included printable cards, video guides, and a pledge form for young travelers to learn and carry their rights, like she had. One by one, students began posting their own stories under the hashtag number because of Kaylin. Some talked about being followed in stores. Others shared moments they were asked to prove their belonging in classrooms, at school dances, in public spaces where no one else was questioned. And everywhere, the message repeated, "I stayed calm. I knew the law. I spoke up." What had begun as one girl holding her phone in a tense moment at Gate 17 had become a blueprint, a spark, a signal to others that they were not alone, and more importantly, not powerless. Kaylin herself had no idea how far it was spreading at first. After the incident, she and her father were taken to a quiet conference room while airline leadership reviewed the policy recommendations she had delivered. It wasn't until a staff member timidly knocked on the door and said, "You're trending worldwide," that she truly understood. Her phone, once back in her hands, was lighting up non-stop. There were messages from friends, from former teachers, from cousins she hadn't heard from in months, from complete strangers who simply wrote, "Thank you." Some messages were from kids her age, middle schoolers, high schoolers who sent voice notes saying they'd never seen anyone like them stand up that way. Some were from adults who admitted they'd stayed silent in similar moments and now regretted it. And some were from parents who said they watched the video with their children over dinner and cried. Kaylin didn't respond to them all. She couldn't. But she read every single one. And with every message, her sense of purpose grew. Back at the gate, before passengers finally began boarding new flights, something else happened. A group of travelers, those who had witnessed the event, formed a circle. Someone suggested exchanging contact info. Not just to share videos, but to stay connected, to make sure this didn't fade after a news cycle. They called it the Gate 17 Witness Network. And within days, that list of names would become a grassroots group pushing for broader passenger protections. The airline, now under public pressure and media scrutiny, moved quickly. They announced a full-scale audit of all gate staff behavior, especially in cases involving minors and passengers of color. They created a task force. They reached out to the Department of Transportation to discuss third-party oversight. But most importantly, they invited Kaylin to meet with their executive team the following month, not as a guest, but as a consultant. Kaylin accepted, with one condition. "I don't want to be your symbol," she told them. "I want to be your accountability." At school, things changed too. Her classmates were buzzing with pride. Teachers used her words in morning announcements. The principal asked her to speak at the next assembly, but Kaylin offered a different idea, a workshop. She wanted to teach her peers not just what she did, but how they could do it too. Because movements don't grow from one voice echoing. They grow when other voices rise. When one girl stands tall, and 1,000 others realize they can too. Kaylin didn't become famous that day. She became a mirror, reflecting back to the world what courage looks like when wrapped in calm, what knowledge looks like when placed in a hoodie, and what justice looks like when one person refuses to sit down. One girl, one action, a whole new wave. 1 week after the incident at Gate 17, Kaylin Monroe walked into a middle school classroom in South Phoenix, not as a student, but as a guest speaker. The walls were decorated with college pennants and motivational posters. A dry erase board read, "Civic Engagement, Real Voices, Real Change." The bell hadn't even rung yet, but the room was already full. Kids leaned forward in their seats, notebooks open, phones tucked away. They weren't just there to listen. They were there to learn. Kaylin stood at the front of the class, hoodie zipped, her now famous passenger equity folder resting on the desk behind her. She didn't bring a slideshow, no script, just her voice and the experience that had gone viral. She started with a question. How many of you have ever felt like you were treated differently not because of what you did, but because of what you looked like? Nearly every hand in the room went up. Kaylin nodded. Me too. That's why I'm here. She wasn't there to talk about going viral. She wasn't there to retell what happened step by step. She was there to pass something on. A lesson her parents gave her. A truth she lived out. And a responsibility she now believed every young person deserved to carry. You don't have to be an adult to defend your dignity, she said. You don't have to wait until you're older, or until you have a job, or a title, or a college degree. You can know your rights now. You can use your voice now. A boy in the back raised his hand. But what if people don't listen? Kaylin smiled gently. Sometimes they won't, but silence won't change that. Speaking up might. She explained how knowing her rights gave her strength that day, not because it protected her from harm, but because it reminded her she wasn't powerless. It helped her stay calm when she was provoked. It helped her speak clearly when someone tried to dismiss her. It helped her make others listen, not with volume, but with truth. I didn't win that moment because I yelled, she said. I won because I didn't let someone else rewrite the story of who I was. She shared 5 principles lessons she hopes every young person can carry in their backpack, just like she carried that folder. 1. Knowledge is your foundation. Know your rights, know what's legal and what's not. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand basic protections. Just start somewhere. 2. Composure is your strength. Anger is valid, but clarity is powerful. Staying calm doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're strategic. 3. Documentation is your protection. In the digital age, your phone is a tool. Record what happens. Write it down. Save names, dates, details. Truth leaves a trail. 4. Speak up, even when your voice shakes. Courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you show up anyway. 5. You don't have to fight alone. Find allies. Whether it's your teacher, your friend, or a stranger who sees what's happening, people will stand with you if you give them a reason to. By the time Kaylin finished, the room was still. But it wasn't the silence of hesitation. It was the silence of understanding, of empowerment, of realization that these middle school students didn't have to wait for adulthood to stand up for what's right. They could start now. As Kaylin gathered her things, a girl approached her and whispered, I used to think it was rude to speak up, but now I think maybe it's rude to stay quiet. Kaylin smiled. That's exactly right. Before leaving, she offered one last challenge. If something happens to you or around you and it feels wrong, ask yourself, what would I want someone to do if it were happening to me? She paused. And then, be that someone. Taking the Sires Noan by the Nother found, indifferent team is 4. If you're listening to this story right now and it moved something in you, if it reminded you of a moment where you stayed silent, or helped you imagine how you might act differently in the future, then let's keep this conversation alive. Share this episode. Tag someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment. What's one right you believe every young person should know by the time they turn 13? Because the truth is, justice doesn't wait for permission, and neither should we. Stand tall. Stay ready, And remember, you're never too young to demand respect. You're never too small to make a system listen. And you're never alone when you stand for what's right.